This is a variable single slit, but the bottom half of it is converted to a double slit with a pin in the middle, so I can just raise it or lower it to change whether I'm looking at a single slit or a double slit of the same outside width. I'm now shining a laser through it, and you can see it's shining through the double slit at the moment, and you can see it's making a double slit pattern. You can see it's making a double slit pattern. That's the important bit. And just for the pedants, Gary, there you can see the envelope as well. Here's one I measured earlier in both double slit mode and single slit mode. I marked the fringes. There was 17 in double slit mode in this set distance and 19 in single slit mode, counting the central maxima as 2, obviously.
And look, the point of this is just to try and explain to Gary that it's not only the outside surfaces which affects the little fringes, it's also the inside surfaces, as you would call them. The impediment, varying either of them, changes the width and number of those little fringes. You want a simple answer, Gary. You want it to be only the outside surfaces of changing the number of those little fringes, just as it would if it was a single slit experiment. It's not a single slit experiment. It's a double slit experiment, and you have a number of factors affecting the width of those little fringes, Gary. I'm sorry it's more complicated than you want it to be, but because you have a simplistic idea of how these things work, that's what leads your conclusions to be wrong. That's what leads your so-called mathematics to be wrong. The mathematics you've never done, even the notches on a string trick that you use to replace your mathematics, even that you've never actually done, and that's why you don't know what the outcome actually is. I do, because I've done it. I've taken the trouble, I've taken the time out of my life to do the actual experiment for real. It's not a thought experiment, it's supposed to be a real experiment, Gary. Somebody put this idea in your head about 18 months ago, and you adapted it as your own, but you've not actually done it. You've just pretended. You've just assumed what the answer would be. You've jumped to conclusions. The very thing you were always accusing everybody else of doing. And it's you who's done it, Gary. You are the conclusion jumper.
So double slit 170 per metre and single slit 190 fringes per metre. They both have the same outside width of this variable double slit. I'll do it again on this sheet of paper so you can see there's no cheating. It's a bit clearer like that. That's roughly the central maxima. So these black marks I'm putting here are the envelope minima, and then there's another one there. It's difficult to film at the same time as doing it. Anyway, obviously that distance is half that distance. That distance is double that distance. It always is. There's always an odd number of fringes in that distance. I'll mark them up now. That's the double slit one marked up. I'll put a measuring tape against that in a minute. Now I will go to the variable slit. I keep the slit width the same, so I've not altered that yet. The bottom half is converted to a double slit with a pin in the middle. Now I lower it because it's on a microscope stand, so I can drop it so it's only a single slit. So we now have a single slit. I'll mark that one up now. And there you can see that I've made an honest marking of the fringes. The double slit on the top and the single slit on the bottom of the same outside width, and I'm making 16 fringes and 19 fringes respectively. So the double slit was making 160 fringes per metre, 16 fringes in this decimetre, and the single slit was making 190 fringes per metre, 19 fringes in this decimetre, counting the central maxima as 2 for obvious reasons. But that means that Gary's fringe widths cannot be correct, because in real life the outside ones give a different result depending on whether there's an impediment included or not. Now Gary's theory doesn't take that into account, so it can't be right. So I've now done this experiment about 4 or 5 times. I've done it twice today. First one I did today and it gave that result. And I've done it again just now and it gave that result. And I've done it in May 2020 using a hair instead of a pin as the impediment. And that gives far more dramatic results. The fringes then become twice the size with the inclusion of a hair, making it a double slit.
An example of that is coming up very, very shortly in the next minute or so. I can't remember where I put it in this video. So have patience, it's there, so you'll get to see how dramatically the width of those little tiny fringes changes just by the inclusion of the impediment that Gary claims has no part in that. He's an idiot.
It's almost as if the impediment acts as a magnifier, and the smaller it is, the greater it magnifies the pattern made by the outside width. That's a theory. Just for reference, this is what it's been set to. I don't want to alter it, but I don't think it's calibrated correctly. I think it needs recalibrating because I think it's more than that. That works out to 900 microns, but I think the slit is greater than 900 microns. Now that pin at the bottom measures at 670 microns. Anyway, I want to leave that as it is. I want to replace that impediment, that 670 micron pin. I want to replace it with something a few hundred microns less. So I'm going to leave this setting the same. So there's the pin I'm going to replace, 670 microns. Okay, so now I've replaced that pin with a 500 micron one. It's accidentally gone in at a slight angle, which illustrates something else very interesting. When you put the impediment in at a slight angle, you can then see the two patterns. You can see that the pattern on top is a longer pattern, a wider pattern, than the one on the bottom. It's a good way of separating out the impediment pattern. And again, the wording should speak for itself.
And for those who can't be bothered reading it, the point I'm trying to get across is that the inclusion of the small impediment expands the small fringes that would otherwise be created by the outside width. If it was a wide single slit, those tiny fringes then become expanded by whatever size impediment you put in. The smaller the impediment, the more it expands that pattern. Well, that's one way of looking at it anyway. So you can almost look at the impediment as a magnifying glass for the tiny fringes made by that wide single slit. That example, I promise you, with the hair is coming up, I promise you, but it's coming up very shortly.
But I've marked the fringes, and once more, because we're using a smaller impediment, 500 microns versus 670 microns before, but the slit has the same outside width, and this expands the small fringes to now fit 130 per metre. It can fit less and less in per metre the smaller we make the impediment. Now, in previous experiments where I've gone down to the thickness of a human hair, about 75 microns, in that case the small fringes doubled in width, halved in number how many you would get per metre. It halved the number you would fit per metre.
Okay, just a very quick look at that old experiment from 2020.
This is the sort of width of slit we're talking about now. You see the hair? Very wide slit.
You can see the small fringes made by the double slit pattern. Then in a moment you'll see where I've marked these fringes on the ruler with a felt tip pen, a Sharpie, so I can then remove the 75 micron hair, then see how big the fringes are. And you will see that they halve in size. Then you will see that they shrink in size, almost as if the impediment was effectively magnifying those fringes made by the large single slit, as it would be if there were no impediment in it. Okay?
And now the blue lines represent the envelope.
Those black pen marks you can see on that ruler, those mark the width of the fringes before I remove the impediment. And these ones circled in yellow show how they shrink when we remove the impediment. So this is from an old experiment in 2020. Removing the 75 micron hair from a double slit made the tiny fringes circled in yellow. But with the 75 micron hair still in place, the tiny fringes were twice as wide, circled in green here, and emphasised a little bit. My original marks aren't too clear, so I'll help you out. There you go. Those are the original widths when it was in double slit mode. And again, in yellow, single slit mode. Anyone can see that in double slit mode, those tiny fringes get doubled in size in this case. Anyone can see that when the slit was in single slit mode, without any impediment, making it a double slit, then we had thinner fringes than when we do make it a double slit. It's almost as if putting that impediment in expands or magnifies those same fringes. But that's just a different way of looking at the same problem. Who can tell?
So again, Gary's theory cannot be correct. And we're now on a 350 micron impediment. Ended up in one of these angled experiments. You can see that. The top pattern is made by one and the lower pattern is made by the other. So you can see that the top and bottom patterns, the impediment and the fringes made by the slit have now separated. So we can see the individual patterns that go to make up the overall pattern. When the impediment and the slit widths are comparable, then they kind of fight each other. At least we can see the two patterns separated out because they are at angles to one another. A very slight angle, but enough so we can see that we have two different patterns. So the thinner dimension is creating the upper pattern and the wider dimension is creating the lower pattern. I hope it's recording well. You can see the two patterns separated out. I've now confirmed that the upper pattern, the little dots, those work out to 180 per metre, and those are caused by the existing outside slit width, as if it was a giant single slit. And the lower dash 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 type pattern, there are 70 of those per metre, and those are caused by the wire impediment, which is 350 microns.
But you'll see shortly that where those two do cross dead in the middle, the central maxima, we do actually get a third different measurement for the fringes then. Have patience, all will become clear, I think. It's confusing actually, but it's clear as it's going to get.
the central maxima, I'm not sure whether to interpret that central maxima as having 3 central fringes or 7. It's always an odd number anyway, whether it's 5 or 3, either way. Those fringes work out to 140 per metre. So I've written on the right hand side, those work out to 140 per metre. You might need to pause the video to read this.
As if anybody can be bothered, but never mind.
So there's a summary. Those little tiny dot saves are made by the outside slit width, that's 180 per metre. Then the dashes, those wider dashes, there were 70 per metre of those, and those are caused by the impediment, which is a 350 micron wire. But the interference between the two of them in the central maxima, whether it's 5 fringes or 3, that works out to 140 per metre in the central maxima. So that's just so you can count them yourself if you wish. Yeah, the 3 occupy about 2.3, 2.4 centimetres, and if there were 5, that would occupy about, what, say 4.6, would you say?
I'm actually measuring 7 tiny fringes in that 4.6 measurements out of there. It is confusing, isn't it?
Yes, it's difficult to do this accurately. I'm just trying to give you an overall impression, though, of the difficulty of going around making simplistic claims like Gary does. It's far from simple, that's what I'm saying. Okay, one more look at it without all my handwriting clutter in the way. So scanning from left to right reasonably slowly. Goes on for quite some time, doesn't it? Well, I run out of board. I've been trying to readjust the angle to get rid of the angle, but it keeps springing back. It's very, very tricky, but it does appear to be a 3 fringe central maxima after all.
Correction. I later took a snapshot of it and spent some time inspecting this in some detail, and I came to the opposite conclusion. No, it's 5 in the central maxima, and so all the other envelope fringes nearby, they all contain 2.5. I know it sounds daft, but that's how it works out. You always have an odd number in the middle, and then you have to divide that by 2, and that's what you get in the others. So the central maxima always has an odd number, and therefore the others also have an odd fractional number. Is that the right way to say it? I'm not a maths person. Does it show? But at least I'm better at maths than Gary, for fuck's sake. And here is a 20-second series of pictures just showing you how I came to that conclusion. Okay.
It's almost in line, but I need to set the camera up so the camera carries on running while I'm over there making the adjustments. I can't do both.
This is effectively a very crude way of doing a variable double slit. It's not quite right though. Still quite interesting until the camera failed on me again.
Yeah, I'm trying to get them aligned so there's no angle between the two patterns that comprise a double slit pattern. Trying to get them aligned. From here I can't see how successful or unsuccessful I'm being. I think I'm aligning it, it's hard to tell.
Unfortunately my camera malfunctioned. I'm afraid the camera went wonky and started going blurred, so I didn't capture the rest, apart from the odd little bit. Which is pretty annoying when it started to look rather good.
So I'll close the slit down completely there. I was trying to explain all this to Gary last May, how interesting it was to look at these variable double slit patterns, and he just said it was a dopey and irrelevant comment, so he didn't read it out, he deleted the comment. And then, hey, what's the surprise, a week or 2 later, he's talking about saying he'd come up with this idea to do a variable double slit.
Alright, another draft physics video presentation. Ugh. What locations bricks of LiDAR? Then Stephen asked some dopey question, but I think it's totally irrelevant about, like I said, we already know what causes the pattern, right? I mean, I've outed the whole thing for you. I have explained it for you. I was sitting here for years wondering.
He still is, but he's in denial. He thinks he's solved it, and he hasn't.
How is that? What's causing these two patterns? Which one does which?
Oh, let me guess. You've not been doing the angled experiment, have you, that I just suggested to you? The one that you said was dopey and irrelevant. Oh, the one where you can see the two separate patterns. You scummy bastard.
So now we know the center impediment decides this big pattern.
No, it doesn't. A few months later, he finally cottoned on when I hinted and hinted and hinted. It's still wrong, still wrong, still wrong, because you pinched the stupid idea off me. I made a mistake when I showed when I showed those separated out angled patterns. I was wrong when I said it was just the two patterns superimposed over each other. I was wrong, and you pinched the idea, ran with it for a few months, and then finally cottoned on. Oh yeah. That's why Steve keeps going on about saying I'm still wrong. Yes, because you were still wrong. And guess what? Today you're still wrong too. You should listen to other people more. I don't know everything, obviously I don't. But I know when you were wrong, you moron. At least have the fucking integrity to credit other people when they give you an idea. I wanted to give it not just to you, to anybody else who wanted to. I thought your channel was a good place to put out this idea that other people could share about the angled experiments, about the variable double slit experiments. The last thing I expected was you to try and pretend that these were your fucking ideas and hide the evidence by deleting my message and not bothering to read it out like you read everybody else's message out. And there was something else. Oh yes, and the information that you said was particularly dopey and irrelevant about the slit width, that how you interpret the numbers, the abbreviations, the letters that are printed on standard commercially available lab slits. Because you were getting it wrong, I'd been getting it wrong. I'm sure a lot of other people get it wrong, so I put the information out there to say that letter means this, that means the other, and that means something else. Because you got it wrong, I got it wrong, and I thought it was useful information. It was actually useful information, but no, you didn't like it, did you? Slit centers can't be having that. Oh no, no. My mistake was to interpret one of the letters as meaning the impediment width. It didn't mean that at all. It meant the slit centers.
Right, so this distance of the block dictates that the big pattern, right?
The big pattern. Note the vile tone of voice, the condescending tone of voice, the he thinks he's won something tone of voice, even though he's talking utter shite, and even he would accept he's talking shite now.
This pattern.
This pattern, as if he's talking to 5-year-olds. He's the 5-year-old.
This pattern.
He actually sounds like Mr. Burns. Smithers, release the hounds. I bet that's who he would like to be in secret.
Okay, and this distance, okay, between the ends of the two openings, that distance decides how big the little bricks of light are inside that pattern.
No, it doesn't. I've just shown you.
So this distance makes this distance makes this, the envelope. The envelope is being caused by the interior surfaces.
No, it's not. You pinched that wrong idea off me by secretly doing the angled experiments, which I told you about in the message that you deleted because you're a lying scumbag. If you do the angled experiments, it will lead you to this wrong conclusion. That's how I know that you've pinched the idea, you daft bastard.
The size of the bricks inside of the envelope is being dictated by the distance between these two surfaces.
And again he's wrong, and again he's wrong. No, it's not. Logically, yes, I understand why you think that, because if that was a single slit, that would be the case. The problem is, the minute you put an impediment in the middle of that, you only have to put a hair in the middle of that, and it magnifies that pattern that supposedly the outside surface is made. How come the impediment changes it as well then? How come the impediment changes it as well then, if the outside surface is all that dictates it? You moron.
There, done, equals truth.
There, done, you have been. If I'd planned this as a trick against you, I couldn't have done it better. If I'd planted something for you to pinch, I couldn't have done it better. For you to pinch an idea that's wrong, that's flawed, when really I was just trying to share it with everybody, including you. I was trying to be nice. I was trying to say, look, try this, try that, try the other, because these give certain results, and I came to the wrong conclusion. And hey presto, you just had to delete the message, say it was dopey and irrelevant, never read it out, never let anybody see it, get rid of it, and then claim, hey, look what I discovered. But you discovered something I discovered. discovered and showed you, and was actually wrong. That's why you're wrong now in this video, and why it took you another 3 frigging months to cotton on after I hinted and hinted and hinted. You're still wrong, Harry. You made a mistake. You've pinched a car with no engine. Let me tell you where the engine is. You're still wrong 18 months later, because you're still not cottoning on to the fact that the impediment does affect the result of the outside surfaces. The outside surfaces do not totally dictate those small fringes. The impediment also affects them. And you've gone down this rabbit hole all because you wanted the most simplistic answer possible. You couldn't stand any complication because your brain couldn't handle it. Unfortunately, nature is more complicated than that. The answer isn't simple. People who go around saying it's simple tend to be simpletons. It's not simple.
Period.
Drop the mic, drop the chalk, or pretentious prick.
And if you think about what I just said,
Oh yes, master, do tell. And yeah, I'm thinking about it alright, because it all sounds very familiar for a good reason.
you'll realize, oh, it's 4 surfaces. And it just depends on the distance between the 4 surfaces. And what are the 4 surfaces? They're 4 point sources.
Well, that's not strictly true. How can a surface be a point source? A table is a surface, but it's not a point source, does it? Tell me where on the table I'm supposed to be considering the point source. It has an area.
4 sources of photon. You represent the phase, it's just notches on the line. And then you can just show how the longer line has notches in a different position. And you're just looking to line up the notches. And that's it. Mechanism provided.
Yeah, mechanism provided by somebody else. I remember somebody suggesting this to you in the comments. Well, it's quite ironic that you've never actually done it, because if you had, you wouldn't have been repeating the wrong assertion all these months, that makes the fringes equal as they spread around the curved surface. It doesn't. They get wider and wider and wider the further out you go. You didn't know that because you've not bothered to actually do this notches on a string thing that somebody else suggested to you in comments.
But these people are just such scum.
You're just transferring your own thoughts about yourself onto other people. You know deep down that you're scum.
I mean, to insult my integrity.
What fucking integrity is that?
You're pretending your math is perfect when it doesn't get the right answer.
Right back at you, Gary. Pretending your math is perfect when it doesn't get the right answer. You don't even do any fucking math, you just pretend you've done it.
And the reason why we don't draw it is because if we drawed it, you'd watch us changing the experiment. You'd watch us putting the wave somewhere it can't be.
And even that's an entirely separate mistake that you've been making. Well, I don't know if it's a mistake or an intentional deception. It's a bit hard to tell whether you're thick or a liar. I'm never quite sure. Because you keep talking about the wave centers being here or the wave centers being there. There's no bloody such thing as the wave centers in this context. Because you should know darn well that they're drawing electromagnetic radiation, electromagnetic waves, as if they were water waves, because drawing it as if they were water waves makes it easier to draw, easier to interpret where the constructive and destructive interference is. You cannot practically draw electromagnetic waves the way they are meant to be drawn if you were doing them literally. You have to take a shortcut. You have to draw them for practical reasons as if they were water waves. But nobody in their right mind thinks that electromagnetic radiation are like water waves. They draw them that way for convenience so that you can interpret them, so that they can draw them. You can't draw electromagnetic waves the way they are meant to be drawn. If you wanted to depict them accurately, you couldn't do it. Nobody can, really. I dare say you could get a computer program to do it very accurately, but on a chalkboard, nobody can do it because it's very, very difficult. But it's easy to draw a few arcs and say, well, that's not electromagnetic radiation, but it gives you the same answer. It's a shortcut, Gary, and you abuse that shortcut, pretending you don't think it's a shortcut, pretending you think that everybody is claiming that electromagnetic radiation does that exact same thing as water waves. There are no slit centers. You're deliberately, well, I think, I'm not sure, you're telling people the wrong thing by saying, and here are the slit centers. There are no slit centers. Electromagnetic radiation goes like that. It's more like a ray, and you can't say, well, that's the center of the ray. Well, it would be meaningless. The rays could be all across the width of the slit. It doesn't go down the center. It's not like a waterway which does have a center, as if you dropped a pebble in a pool. That would be the wave center. Anyway, you're either getting this or you're not. You're probably not.
You have to create 2 waves that essentially have 2 different frequencies. Will he admit the truth? I hate this fucking planet of assholes and liars and scum.
Yeah, you twat, you pinch the idea of me, haven't you? I was talking about these angled experiments where you can separate out the two patterns, and that's how he came to the wrong conclusion. Wrong conclusion. Yeah, these, I was explaining about that. And he obviously did that at home and came to the wrong conclusion like I did at the time. The double slit pattern isn't really interference at all, that it's just two patterns superimposed. Because I was explaining about the angled pattern. You can deny that all he wants, but I still have a record of the comment. So there we go. I think I'm going to have to shut it down now. I think we've come to the bitter end really. I've run out of camera time. We had a bit of fun.
And this distance deciding this size. All right, game over. All right, it's understood now. You can't fool me or the people watching this video anymore with this dodge. We now know what surface is causing what effect. We know if I do a single slit at this distance, I'll get this size block. So the game is over.
But this is not true.
That the bottom pattern was created by a central impediment that was exactly the same size as the opening of the top pattern. You agree with that, correct? You're not disputing that, are you, fucknut? And so you are pretending there's some arguing about the pattern size. You fucking liar. Do the fucking test at home. So again, just idiotic. We know now that all I do is move the outside surfaces in and out, and I'll change how many little blobs of light are showing.
And 18 months later, you still haven't realised that you only have to move the inside surfaces in and out, and that will also change those little blobs of light, as you were calling them. It's not just the outside surfaces that change those little patterns. It's not just the outside surfaces which changes those little patterns. It's the inside surfaces which also changes those little patterns. It's not as simple as you want it to be. I'm sorry.
They'll be stuck in the same bigger pattern because I'm not changing the surfaces in the center. So all I have to do is move the two outside slits, and I can make 3 dots, 6 dots, 10 dots, 20 dots.
And you've even got that wrong, because if you're on about the central maxima, you cannot have an even number of dots in it. 3 dots, yes. 6 dots, no. 10 dots, 20 dots, whatever you said. No, they have to be an odd number. 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. That's how many you get in the central maxima.
By just changing the outside slits. Predict the pattern before you even see it. So will I. So more implication that somehow, oh, my theory doesn't work because I don't know that these two outside surfaces are dictating the size of those little blocks. Well, yeah, I do know that, asshole.
But you don't seem to know that the inside surfaces also changes the width of those little dots, the little fringes. But you don't seem to know that the inside surfaces also alters the width of those little fringes. Why don't you know that, Gary? Because you've jumped to conclusions that only the outside surfaces affects the width of them. And you're wrong. Sorry, you're wrong.